Manipulation rarely looks like manipulation while it's happening. It looks like love, or reason, or just a bad day. That's the whole point. The most effective tactics don't feel like tactics. They feel like normal life, right up until you're standing in the middle of your own relationship wondering how you got here. Today we're breaking down 13 of the most well-documented manipulation techniques, the actual psychology behind why they work on otherwise smart, capable people, and exactly what to do the next time you spot one. Some of these come from decades of published research. All of them are worth knowing by name, because once you can name a pattern, it starts losing its grip on you. Technique number 1, love bombing. This is when someone you just met floods you with intensity, constant texting, declarations of love within days, talk of a shared future before you've even had a real fight yet. It feels incredible, which is exactly the danger. A study out of the University of Arkansas surveyed nearly 500 college students and found that this exact pattern of excessive early communication was directly linked to narcissistic traits and insecure attachment styles. Here's why it works on smart people. Being love-bombed activates the same brain chemistry as falling in love naturally. Dopamine, oxytocin, all of it. So your body has no way to distinguish a genuine connection from a manufactured one in the moment. The counter is almost embarrassingly simple: slow down on purpose. Healthy relationships can survive a deliberately slower pace. Manipulative ones can't, because slowing down gives your logical brain time to catch up with what your nervous system already fell for. Technique number 2, gaslighting. Someone insists an event you clearly remember never happened, or tells you that you're remembering it wrong, or that you're simply too sensitive. Researchers writing in the journal Personal Relationships conducted in-depth interviews with 65 gaslighting survivors and found a consistent pattern. Victims eventually start doubting their own basic grasp on reality, a state the researchers call epistemic incompetence. Once that doubt sets in, the manipulator doesn't even need to keep lying anymore. You start editing your own memory for them. The counter is documentation. Write things down. Save messages. Not to build a legal case, just to anchor yourself in what actually happened. Because gaslighting depends entirely on ambiguity, and a written record is the one thing ambiguity can't survive. Technique number 3, the hot and cold cycle, sometimes called intermittent reinforcement. This is affection and warmth that shows up unpredictably, sometimes intense, sometimes completely absent, with no pattern you can pin down. Psychologists Dutton and Painter published foundational research on what they called traumatic bonding, finding that this exact combination, an imbalance of power plus inconsistent treatment, was enough on its own to create a powerful emotional attachment to the person causing you harm. Here's the mechanism. Unpredictable rewards trigger a stronger dopamine response than steady, reliable ones, the same principle that keeps people pulling a slot machine lever. Your brain isn't broken for staying attached. It's doing exactly what unpredictable reward schedules are known to do to any brain. The counter is recognizing the pattern itself as the red flag, not waiting for the good moments to prove the relationship is fine. Since those good moments are often the mechanism keeping you stuck, not evidence against it. Technique number 4, guilt tripping. Someone makes you feel responsible for their emotions so consistently that you start managing their feelings before you even consider your own. After everything I've done for you is the classic opener. This works because most people have a genuine, healthy instinct to care about how their actions affect others. And guilt trippers deliberately hijack that instinct, stretching ordinary empathy into obligation. The tell is proportion. Feeling bad because you genuinely hurt someone is appropriate and healthy. Feeling bad every single time you assert a normal boundary is not empathy working correctly. It's empathy being exploited. The counter is a simple mental checkpoint. Ask yourself whether the guilt matches the actual size of what happened, or whether it's just bigger than the situation calls for. Technique number 5, the silent treatment, deployed on purpose as a punishment. This one needs an important distinction. Relationship researcher John Gottman's decades of observational studies found that when people go quiet during conflict because they're physiologically overwhelmed, heart rate spiking past 100 beats per minute, that's a real biological response, not manipulation. But there's a different version. Silence used deliberately and repeatedly to punish, to control, or to force someone into apologizing just to end the discomfort. The giveaway is intent and pattern. Genuine flooding wants a break and a return to the conversation later. Weaponized silence wants you scrambling to fix things with no clear conversation ever happening at all. The counter is naming it directly and calmly. Ask for a specific time to actually finish the conversation, and notice whether that time ever comes. Technique number 6, DARVO, which stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. Psychologist Jennifer Freyd identified this pattern decades ago, and it unfolds in 3 predictable moves. First, flat denial that anything happened. Second, a sudden attack on your credibility, your memory, your tone. Anything except the actual issue. Third, and this is the part that catches people off guard, the person who did the harm recasts themselves as the one under attack. Researchers who tested this pattern experimentally found that exposure to a DARVO response measurably lowered how believable observers found the original victim, and made the actual perpetrator seem less responsible. It works specifically because most people pause to check whether they caused someone's distress, and that pause is exactly the gap DARVO exploits. The counter is refusing to let the topic change. If you raised a specific concern, that concern is the only thing that needs a response, not their sudden feelings about being confronted. Technique number 7, triangulation. A third person, an ex, a coworker, a friend, gets pulled into a conflict that should only involve 2 people, usually to create jealousy, add pressure, or make you feel replaceable. Well, my ex never had a problem with this is a textbook example. This works because comparison is a powerful lever on self-worth, and bringing in an outside party makes a private disagreement suddenly feel like a competition you didn't sign up for. The counter is refusing to engage with the comparison at all. The third party isn't in the room and isn't part of this conversation, so the only relevant question is what's actually happening between the 2 of you right now. Technique number 8, negging. A backhanded insult wrapped in a compliment, delivered specifically to create a small dent in someone's confidence. You're actually really pretty for someone who dresses like that is the classic format. It works because a mild, confusing put-down from someone who otherwise seems interested in you creates a strange itch to win their approval back, an itch most people don't consciously notice they're chasing. The counter is noticing the confusion itself as the signal. A genuine compliment doesn't leave you slightly off balance. If a comment makes you feel both flattered and small at the same time, trust that unsettled feeling over the flattering words. Technique number 9, the foot in the door technique. Someone asks for something small first. Once you say yes, the requests quietly escalate. Psychologists Friedman and Fraser demonstrated this back in 1966 with a striking experiment. Homeowners who'd already agreed to a tiny early request were more than twice as likely to agree to a far bigger one days later, compared to people asked the big request cold. The mechanism is self-perception. Once you say yes to something small, you start seeing yourself as the kind of person who says yes. And staying consistent with that self-image becomes more important than the actual size of what's being asked. The counter is evaluating every request completely on its own. Regardless of what you agreed to last time, saying yes yesterday creates zero obligation to say yes today. Technique number 10, the door-in-the-face technique, which works in the opposite direction. Someone opens with a request so large you're almost certain to refuse it, then follows up with a smaller request, the one they actually wanted all along. Researcher Robert Cialdini demonstrated this directly. People asked to volunteer with juvenile offenders for 2 hours a week for the full years. An outlandish request almost everyone declined, were then asked to simply chaperone a single one-day trip. 50% agreed to the smaller ask after refusing the bigger one, compared to only 17% of people asked about the small trip with no large request beforehand. The mechanism here is guilt paired with a feeling of reciprocity. Refusing someone once creates subtle pressure to give ground on the very next ask. The counter is treating the smaller request as its own separate decision, made completely apart from whatever came right before it. Technique number 11, moving the goalposts. You finally meet the condition someone set, and instead of satisfaction, a brand new condition appears that was never mentioned before. This tactic works because it keeps you permanently in pursuit mode, always one step away from approval that was never actually designed to arrive. The tell is a pattern across time, not any single instance, since reasonable people sometimes do have follow-up concerns. What separates manipulation from a genuine ongoing conversation is whether the requirements ever stay met for more than a moment. The counter is keeping a simple mental or literal list of what was originally asked for, so a shifting standard becomes visible instead of just feeling like constant, vague failure on your part. Technique number 12. Playing the victim. Someone who caused real harm reframes themselves as the one who's actually struggling, redirecting your attention and your energy toward comforting them instead of addressing what they did. This works because most people have been raised to prioritize kindness toward anyone who appears to be in pain, and manipulators who understand this can weaponize your own decency against you with real precision. The counter is holding to things as true at the same time. Someone can be genuinely going through something difficult and still be fully responsible for the specific harm they caused. Comforting a person's distress and letting them off the hook for their actions are two completely separate decisions, not one automatic package deal. Technique number 13, the last one, isolation. Slowly, and rarely all at once, someone starts steering you away from friends, family, or other close relationships, often while it's framed as wanting more of your time or simply not liking certain people in your life. This one is considered a core feature of coercive control specifically because it works. The fewer outside perspectives you have access to, the more one single person's version of events becomes your entire reality by default. The counter is deliberately protecting outside relationships, even when it feels like more effort than it's worth in the moment. People who knew you before this relationship started are often the ones who can see a shifting pattern most clearly, precisely because they're standing outside of it. So that's 13 manipulation techniques, and if even one of these sounded uncomfortably familiar, that's not a personal failing on your part. These patterns are specifically engineered to work on caring, reasonable people. That's the entire design. The single thread running through every counter strategy on this list is the same. Slow down, get some distance, and let a pattern reveal itself over time instead of judging any one moment in isolation. Manipulation depends on you staying confused. Naming exactly what's happening, out loud or even just to yourself, is usually the first moment that confusion